You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
And we're off to another edition, another episode of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. Welcome back. If you don't know me, I'm Sean Reynolds. I am the owner of Summit Properties Northwest, Reynolds and Kline Appraisal, and host of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I'm a pro-business guy. I talk about some stuff that is business-related, real estate-related, but more importantly, talk about Seattle. That's what we're talking about today. And the topic is Seattle-ization. Is it a thing? Have you heard this term? I'm reading from an article that is a couple of years old, and it was way before CHOP, Chaz, and all the protests and all this other nonsense that put us even more in the headline, the national and world headlines. It's Seattle-ization. It's what's happening in a really expensive city when you kind of have this big tech takeover. Let's check it out. Seattle-ization. This is a Seattle Times article. And it's literally from 2019. Even though it's old, I think it's interesting because it brings up a bunch of points. And I want to get into it with you guys. All right, American cities fear what's happening here in Seattle. You're paying a premium to live here. The cost of living in Seattle has risen faster than in any other American city. Yep, we all know that. How's this for irony? Well, we've been worried about Seattle becoming the next San Francisco. It turns out other cities have been worried about becoming the next Seattle. Oh, no. That's right. Seattle-ization is a thing now. And that's at least according to a New York Times article published last week. It's described as a particularly dire diagnosis. So dramatic, dire diagnosis. And characterized by high housing costs and tech wealth. A combination that's thoroughly transformed the city in an alarmingly short span of time. Has any other city in the United States had such a transition than Seattle? I don't think so. So this transition started happening when I was in high school in the 80s, probably in the early 80s, mid 80s. We started to hear about people. Oh, you know that guy? He worked for that company called Microsoft. There's some Bill Gates guy. Well, he's got all these stock options, and guess what? He's a millionaire now. Started to hear about that. Started to hear about the multimillionaire. Started to hear about the guy with 50 million, 100 million. Then we started talking billionaires here in the city of Seattle. That's what we've had. Tech has just basically taken over here, and all of this Boeing and blue-collar stuff kind of just put to the side. People who had those kind of jobs no longer able to afford the kind of homes that we have here. And this whole lifestyle, this whole sociological change has taken place in Seattle, and it has been dramatic. I've watched it happen. I've been here all my life, not necessarily in Seattle, but in one of the suburbs, and I have lived in Seattle. Went to the University of Washington. Didn't graduate, but that's a whole other story. I got close-ish halfway through my junior year. But, I had enough. I figured out that probably just going to go do real estate. Don't really need a degree for that. Let's go. So that's kind of what I did. Even in New York City, apparently, some folks are terrified that the planned Amazon campus there could turn the place into Seattle on steroids. This is back when New York City was going to be HQ2 for Amazon. And guess what? New York City, in their infinite wisdom, they said, we're not giving you any tax breaks. We're not doing anything like that. And Amazon said, well, if you're not, we're out of here because your city, it would be good with tax breaks, but it's not as good without. So let's go back to Bellevue, where we don't give them any tax breaks either, but it's just a better place to run a business. That's what Amazon has said. I like the term Seattle on steroids, though. So New York City is Seattle light compared to Seattle. It's a little unsettling to find out we've become other cities' worst case scenario. I think that is true. People look at Seattle, and especially now, they look at Seattle. You guys, all the people that tune in, they want to see the train wreck that is Seattle. And I report on it daily because it's as easy as just picking up any news story and go, oh, there's a Seattle headline. Let's see what we got going on there. Oh, that's some weird stuff. What are those people doing? People from all over the world tune in to see the train wreck that is Seattle. And I diligently follow the stories for you guys so you don't have to go through all these news stories and figure out what's what. I'm living here. I'm experiencing it. And guess what? It's what's happening. It's Seattle-ization. It's a little unsettling to find out we've become other cities' worst case scenario, but it's also understandable when you consider not just how expensive Seattle has become, but how quickly it happened. In 2013, when census data showed that Seattle had suddenly become the fastest growing big city in the nation, it seemed to come from just out of the blue. Of course, that turned out to be just the beginning. But think back to right before then, in 2012. Amazon had consolidated its workforce in South Lake Union only 2 years earlier. The gears were already in motion, but most of us were oblivious to the tidal wave of change that was about to hit. So I've got a boat that is on Lake Union, and our views are directly at South Lake Union. And the skyline, I look out over the lake, and then I look to the Seattle city skyline. It is way different now than it was 10 years ago. It is wild how many buildings have popped up. And that's basically because of Paul Allen of Microsoft, his vision with Vulcan to develop that area that was basically, it was rough. South Lake Union was rough back in the day. It was like kind of that real grimy urban setting where lots of graffiti and just kind of, some seedy businesses in there and just some crazy stuff. Now it's filled with, skyscrapers, big tall office buildings, Amazon, you name it, Microsoft, everybody's in there. And it is this big urban setting now. It's no longer kind of sleepy little Seattle. It used to be a former Indian territory. It's big city. It's got big city problems. So I guess we thought of Seattle as a fairly expensive place to live back then, 2014, which is a little funny in retrospect. That year, the cost of living index scored Seattle at 115.2, which meant that living costs here were 15.2% higher than the national average. 100 is the index's average. That score ranked Seattle 35th among the more than 300 cities included in the index that year. We were just about tied with Portland. A few of the cities that had higher living costs than Seattle in 2012 were Sacramento, Philadelphia, and Anchorage, Alaska. Fast forward to today. Keep in mind, this is 2019. The most recent cost of living index release for the third quarter of 2018 pegs Seattle at 53.6% above the national average. In just 6 years, our index score jumped by about 38 points. No other city comes close to matching that. We have skyrocketed all of a sudden. And that's why I think people look at Seattle and go, all that nonsense you've got going on there, and it's so expensive, why on earth would you want to live there? Good question. That's a great question. And a lot of people answer it with, well, you've got this quality of life that you can't get anywhere else. Granted, the whole rioting thing, but let's be honest, the whole rioting thing is limited to a very small area of Seattle that has always been super progressive. Capitol Hill has always been just that liberal, super progressive area. It's where things like that always happen. It's when you're a kid, you go there because you want to go to little shops that have just kind of weird stuff that you don't see anywhere else. Maybe they've got a head shop. Maybe they've got a tattoo place that has cool tattoos. Maybe they've got t-shirts that say stuff that you wouldn't find elsewhere in the city. That's Capitol Hill, and that's where all this stuff is going on in a really small geographic area. The rest of the city is exploding, and that's why when I talk about how Seattle real estate is appreciating, people around the country are like, I thought you were just exaggerating. They're talking to me. I thought you were just really embellishing how much property values are going up. Now that I'm out actually showing people homes, I am realizing just how fast things are appreciating in Seattle and how much property values are rising. Seattle has some of the biggest appreciation of any city in the United States, bar none. And that's from me as an appraisal guy as well, just having to look at data after data after data. And you look at Seattle's progress and you look at other cities, in spite of all the nonsense we've got going on here, a lot of appreciation, meaning there's a lot of people coming in and there just isn't enough housing. No other city comes close to matching that. We're now firmly established as the sixth most expensive place to live in the country. And this is a couple of years ago, according to the index, a mark we first hit that at the end of last year. So it would have been the end of 2018. And yeah, we've left Portland in the dust. Even though the Rose City is also in the top 10 with a 13-point gain in its index score, the cost of living index is published quarterly by the Arlington, Virginia-based Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness. Imagine telling that people that's where you work. I work for the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness. Like, what? What do you do there? Never mind. Hey, that's a non-profit research and policy organization. They've been producing city-to-city cost comparisons since 1968, the year I was born, collecting data at the local level on prices for more than 60 goods and services in 6 major categories: housing, healthcare, transportation, utilities, grocery items, and miscellaneous goods and services. I'm getting bored. Are you guys? Yeah, I mean, no one will be surprised to learn that of these categories, housing here has seen the most precipitous climb. In 2012, our housing costs were about 35% above the average. Now they're 113% higher. Because housing is most people's number one cost, when you're figuring out a percentage of your income that can go towards housing, it has steadily ramped up from 30, 35, 40, 45 to up to 50% in some cases where lenders will allow income. It depends what it is, and there's lots of different circumstances, but the allowable income guides of what percentage, and just in general for people. All right, if you live in a big city, 60% of your income is going to go to rent. It's like, oh my gosh, is that true? Yeah, it is true. And in big, dense urban cities, it can be even higher than that. That is just what your housing is going to cost you. It's astronomical. But almost everything in Seattle is much more expensive than it used to be. In each of the index's 6 categories, Seattle's score has gone up. We rank toward the top for the price of nearly every good and service included in the index. So a lot of you are going to be saying at this point in time, why do you live there? And it's a quality of life issue. We got lots of stuff going on here. It's not super hot in the summer. It's really nice. In the winter, yeah, it's gloomy and it rains, but you can work with that. A lot of jobs. Employers come here because they want to poach people from the job pool we've got going on here. Got lots of skiing. You got Puget Sound. You've got the water. You've got the mountains. You got all kinds of stuff going on here. So if you haven't visited Seattle, come and see the freak show that is Seattle during the summer. Come during the summer because it's pretty impressive. During the winter, you're going to get wet. You're going to look like an outsider because you're carrying an umbrella. Nobody carries an umbrella here. You just man up and you get wet and you wear a coat with a hood on it. That's what you do. No umbrellas. From cooking oil to car repairs, from a trip to the dentist to yoga classes, you're paying a premium to live here. In 2012, we were actually below the national average in one major category: utilities. Cheap water, cheap electricity. In the most recent data, we're 10% above average, which is still a bargain compared with everything else. In so many ways, Seattle is an amazing success story, thriving and economically vibrant, drawing thousands of people from around the world and a country in the world. When you think about it, great American cities that have fallen on hard times, that are losing population and dealing with epidemics of violent crime, Seattle seems inevitable. And yet, when I do all the SEO on our YouTube channel, I do the descriptions, I do the titles. So if something bombs, you can blame me, but that's just me. So I'm looking for key terms that are highly searchable and indexed. That is what I look at a lot of the times. Leaving New York City, leaving California, leaving LA, leaving all these other cities. Find those a lot. You know what you don't find? Leaving Seattle, leaving Portland. People are still going into those cities. Despite the headlines, despite all this stuff going on, we've got an influx of people into our cities here. It's basically because of the lifestyle, not because of our city leadership, because we know that's just terrible. It's not because of some of this crazy events like CHOP. We know those are going on because of city leadership. And if you can get by all that stuff, the rest of the stuff that our area has to offer, it's this weird conundrum. People are like, what is going on there? What's happening? Seattle Seahawks are what, 5-0? I mean, come on. If you need to know anything more about Seattle, 5-0, it's pretty good. I don't talk a lot about sports a lot, but I will jump on the bandwagon of a professional team that's local that's 5-0, especially during a pandemic. But we've also paid a hefty price for our success. Seattle has. The sudden injection of tech wealth has made Seattle a more exclusive place. It's exacerbated inequalities, pushing people out of city or even into homelessness. And that has really gotten terrible in the last couple of years. Awful, horrible. Rapid growth has taxed our infrastructure, and the debate over where to house all these new people has divided the city. It's enough to make you consider towns at the other end of the cost of living index. And so this is the beginning of people starting to think, 2018, 2019, this was the beginning of people looking around going, all right, Seattle's got a lot to offer, and yet the city leadership is weird. I don't really want to be around here anymore. And guess what? I can go somewhere warm that's way cheaper. It's got way more sunshine. That's what people have done that are in the position where they can do that. Now, there's still a ton of people coming in here, and it's economically driven, right? It's the tech jobs. The tech jobs are here. The tech jobs are not in these other places that we're talking about. Just not happening yet. The city that's seen the biggest drop in its index score actually went from having an above average cost of living in 2012 to one that's well below average today. And that's not the only way in which it's the opposite of Seattle, because according to the World Meteorological Organization, it also happens to be the sunniest place on Earth. Down nearly 14 points on the cost of living index, that city is Yuma, Arizona. All right, Yuma. I don't hear a lot of people saying, you know what, I'm going to go move to Yuma. That's where I'm going to go. I hear a lot of people from Seattle buying houses in Scottsdale and in Phoenix, because they are cheap, they are affordable, they are a political climate that people from here find refreshing if you're, looking that direction. And real estate down there makes sense. So I know a lot of people buying real estate down there, and yeah, it does make sense. For me, it's kind of like, all right, Phoenix is a different market, Scottsdale is a different market. I'm going to focus on my own backyard. That's Seattle. I'm going to keep doing the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. Maybe one day I'll have a house there. I don't know. I think Phoenix is cool, but it's not where I'd want to be. I think Maui is cool. I love to go to Grand Wailea and the south end of Maui, but doesn't mean I want to buy some place and live there, because guess what? I like Seattle for all its good and bad. Right now, it's got a lot of bad going on. And on that note, I'm going to keep reporting whatever it is that comes up to you here right on the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. That's it for me today. Seattle-ization. It's a word, it's a term. Is it happening? I don't know. Probably. We don't get too worked up about it. We just talk about it. Thanks again for joining me on the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I will catch you on the next one. Until then, bye for now. We'll see you then. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.